As things move faster, as technology comes into the space, we need to understand the changes around design automation, engineering efficiency, and what technology is bringing into the space. But two, be able to deliver on those as there's more and more pressure on producing work faster, improving quality, those sorts of things. So that area is very exciting to me, and I like to speak of it in those terms as opposed to like generative AI in the engineering space. It's like I like to think of it in terms of design automation, engineering efficiencies, things like that are a little more relatable, that we can align to some specific things that we're trying to do and avoid the general use of the term.
Welcome to the Trailblazers podcast, presented by VST Global, where we feature the visionaries who are shaping the future of the AEC industry. My name is Eileen Canady. I'm a director at VST Global, and I'll be your host for today's show. Joining me today is Nick Otto, Chief Information Officer at Kimley-Horn. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So Nick, your career journey has been fascinating. You went from environmental planning to IT, back to environmental planning. Can you talk to me a little bit about your journey and how you got here?
Sure, and it is a little atypical. I studied environmental planning and conservation and nature writing, or American Transcendentalism, in college, and had visions of working for game and inland fisheries or something like that, and ended up in the hazardous waste business for a few years. Switching into IT in the mid-90s, and just it really stuck. Never looked back, and ended up full circle working for a planning and design firm in the technology space. So nothing to do with my
exactly
my past environmental planning work.
And now we're here talking about all things AI. So how has this path allowed you to take some of that EI and integrate it into your role in the AEC space and at Kimley-Horn?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see those things kind of come full circle over time. My non-traditional background, and I explain it to people at times, it's like a lot of IT folks, I think some in rows and columns and zeros and ones. I tend to feel like I think in circles, and maybe that's the work I did in environmental planning and ecosystem management, things like that. I think that helps me think a little differently about how systems interact. And having been in multiple different companies, I spent some time in the grocery sector doing IT and scales, and spent some time in retail and then high tech, and have been back up in this engineering space. I think that diversity of background has helped me think differently with the emerging systems and the change that we're going through.
And sometimes it's nice to understand, even learn about your industry better, even by knowing what the others are doing. So that's fascinating. So congratulations to Kimley-Horn on winning and being recognized as one of the top 100 best places to work for 17 consecutive years.
Yeah.
That is truly amazing. So congrats to you.
Thank you. We're proud of that.
Yeah, and as a leader in technology, how are you shaping your team in order to really have earned this and contributed to this successful award?
Yeah, and like I said, it's been 17 years. I've worked in several companies that have really great culture. I've never worked somewhere that had so much focus on culture and maintaining culture and investing in our employees. It's a tremendous part of how we go about running our firm, and we talk about creating an environment for our employees to flourish that enables us to serve our clients. And that's the core of the firm, right? We invest in our folks. We have really good retention, development to their careers, and I think as technology change comes, that serves us even better. Right, the reskilling, retooling, repurposing conversations are very easy to have internally because it's part of how we operate and how we transform year after year. And we're super proud of 17 years of staff intern. We celebrate it every year. So it's not just a tagline we throw on our email signature.
As you should be.
That culture is core of how we do things.
The team members that you're cultivating, typically, I would imagine, are engineers and project managers and whatnot. And now, with all of this AI coming in, I would imagine there's different types of engineers, maybe a prompt engineer, and data scientists. So have you experienced a little bit of that transition, and do you foresee more of that happening?
A little bit of the transition. I mean, as you know, in our space, you have run the whole gamut of technology adoption by your clients. And first and foremost, we're here to serve our clients. And so we will respond to where the clients are taking us. So if you have a client that is going to push those boundaries, we'll engage and talk with them. You have a client that's more conservative, then you'll stay there. And it all depends on what sector, what industry, what work. And even within IT, our primary focus is serving our engineers so that our engineers and planners and designers can serve our clients. So we're trying to be very flexible with that, not be an early adopter, not be a laggard, be a little bit of a fast follower in place, but give our folks, especially my IT staff, time to learn and adapt to the new roles and take it on. Rather than just, hey, I need to build an AI-focused IT team, so I'm going to post and hire a few positions, like invest in them, because we've created new terms, prompt engineering. I mean, it's fine to create a new position, but what's that going to look like in 12 months or 24 months?
Right. Things are changing so fast.
Things are changing fast. The vendors are changing fast. What works, what isn't going to work.
Exactly. And I know you're big on developing strategic partnerships. And how do you go about creating those partnerships, and how does that influence what you're able to achieve and accomplish at Kimley-Horn?
Yeah, and the tech partnerships are super important to everything we do. And having been in this space for quite a long time and experienced good relationships and negative relationships with technology providers, I feel it's very, very important to turn your top relationships from being a transaction or a vendor relationship into a true partnership. And we've embraced some of our key technology partners at a pretty high level, to the point where we will share back and forth. What's good for them is good for us. Sometimes what's good for the two of us is good for the industry at large, specifically around our engineering and CAD provider software firms, and be very transparent with them on what's working for us, what's not working for us. And I don't know the best way to say it, but like not beating your vendors up all the time.
Right, exactly,
right?
Exactly. And it's all about relationships, no matter what you do in life. And so having those partnerships, I think, unless it's a win-win, it's not a partnership.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always try to keep the big picture in mind with all of my tech
Right.
partnerships. Like, where do I need this relationship in 2 years or 3 years? And not just, am I preparing for the next renewal, or am I preparing for the next purchase? Like, where do I need the relationship in 2 to 3 years? Because anything that helps me perform better and helps us deliver better is good in the long term.
And some of the things you've written and said, you've emphasized getting the basics right.
Mm-hmm.
How do you basically balance getting the basics right and then moving into some, more advanced technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I beat that drum of the basics all the time. Every person in IT that reports up to me has a tent card on their desk.
Oh, that's awesome.
And at the top of it,
great.
It says up and running. All right, that the number one job of a technology professional in IT is to keep systems up and running. And we have core principles, we have core tenets, and we revise those from time to time. We talk about them with the entire organization. Once a quarter, I have a call with all IT staff for an hour. And we don't just do status updates. We talk about culture, we talk about how things are going, we talk about our principles, and we always come back to up and running, and what I like to call IT 101.
Okay.
Right. And I think some of that's my background, coming from running IT in the grocery sector and running IT in the retail sector and low margin businesses where failure results in real dollars very fast. And then we try to balance that, to your point, with we do need to make strategic changes. We need to add value. We need to work our way closer to the business. So I think of it as kind of an inverted pyramid, where a lot of times there's a ton of focus on kind of your value-added work and your project delivery, and the operational stuff is last. Where I flip it around and say the operational portion of IT is the most important thing we do, and then your projects are the things that you're expected to deliver. So you have to deliver those. You're expected to deliver those, and then you earn your right to provide the value-added services at the top. So you earn your way to the top of the pyramid, as opposed to constantly selling at the top of the pyramid and neglecting the foundational components of keeping IT up and running.
Absolutely. Without the foundation, you have nothing. And then I completely understand. And so let's just say you earn your way to the top. If there was a specific technology that you would say, this is really what we want to, do you have something on your top priority that you say, I really want to focus on this from a technology perspective? And that'll kind of get us through the next couple of years of innovation.
We're very focused on things like design automation,
Okay.
engineering efficiency. Right? As things move faster, as technology comes into the space, we need to understand the changes around design automation, engineering efficiency, and what technology is bringing into the space. But two, be able to deliver on those as there's more and more pressure on producing work faster, improving quality, those sorts of things. So that area is very exciting to me, and I like to speak of it in those terms as opposed to like generative AI in the engineering space. It's like I like to think of it in terms of design automation, engineering efficiencies, things like that are a little more relatable, that we can align to some specific things that we're trying to do and avoid the general use of the terms.
Beyond technology, there's the whole cultural readiness. So how are you preparing from a people perspective of some of the cultural changes that innately happen when you have new technology?
Yeah, and that's where I'm leaning heavily on the culture.
Okay.
But also embracing some pretty extreme transparency with my staff. I've been doing this a long time, and there was nothing more frustrating to me early in my career than not knowing what the leaders were thinking. You knew what they were doing because they'd communicate what they were doing. They'd communicate the strategic imperatives, things like that. But you didn't know what they were thinking, the challenges they were facing. We're pretty transparent within the organization. And once I became in a leadership position, I didn't want the staff that worked for me to just wonder why I was making the decisions I was making. So we've embraced some pretty radical transparency within the organization, and also distributed the responsibility for research and suggestions and ideas and proof of concepts all the way through the organization. So right now I've got some work going on around Microsoft Copilot, like everyone does. I have a young man that's early in his career, just a couple years out of college, that had some interest. Have him leading some things there that typically you'd have someone with more years of experience leading. Because he had that desire, he had that passion. Then I also have him partnered with someone that's been working for us for 16, 17 years. So trying to balance those teams out with someone with a legacy understanding of what we do with the younger folks, because they bring a different thought process. But the transparency, the candor, and I'm open with my staff about where I don't have answers.
Excellent. And I've heard more success stories about what you just said about regardless of the age, it's the passion. And if someone shows an interest and a passion, give them an opportunity.
Right.
So I love to hear those stories.
And we put guardrails around them.
Right, of course. And having the mentor, someone who's 16 years in, 16 years experience, and then they probably both learn from each other. Right.
Right.
So
and I encourage my staff as well to really think broadly and to not just be constantly focused on technology.
Right.
To think about things beyond technology. One thing that I've become known for within my group is sharing my reading list. And I don't just share my tech reading list or my books I'm reading on business and things like that. I share my personal reading list. And it's been interesting to see the reception when people ask you what you're reading and you'll give them a self-help book or something. Like, well, I'm reading this right now. But encouraging them to be broad, that, my fiction reading or things like that, and say, hey, don't just consume tech things all the time, right? Think really broadly. You never know what you're going to glean from something you're reading that maybe was written 100 years ago. That'll trigger a thought that helps you solve a problem that maybe you're working on that's very high tech or very futuristic, right?
Exactly. I think we're going to have to share some reading lists after later on this evening. But I always say sometimes my best thinking moments are, on a walk or just removing yourself from a intense situation, and same thing with reading and just kind of getting your brain to think in different. So it makes complete sense. That's amazing. So you serve on the board of directors for the Triangle Technology Executive Council. Can you share some of the importance of that and networking with your peers and learning and staying informed about technology trends?
Yeah, and that's a small group we have in the Raleigh-Durham area. And we have a lot of tech firms there, fair number of companies, and we have a small group of CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, whatever you want to call them. They get together on a regular basis. It's informal. We do have some programming, but that's been an invaluable resource for me. We incorporate, the Chatham House rules a lot of times.
Right.
Of hey, we're gonna throw out what we're struggling with, so don't share it too broadly. And a great sounding board, because most of those leaders, I'm from one of the few engineering firms based in Raleigh that's in that group. So we've got folks from different industries and sectors, and those different perspectives are very good. T-Tech, we run a little different than other tech organizations in that we limit vendor participation. Okay. So it becomes much more peer network driven, less vendor and sponsorship driven, and just having that place to noodle on ideas. And
speaking of noodling ideas and learning about new things, do you have advice for engineering professionals just starting out today and kind of what they should focus on and kind of really, especially those interested in technology, AI in the AEC space?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to being broad, but not being so focused on all the emerging technology. Because as much as the emerging technology is going to change the way we do things, understanding the core technologies that have to be stable and have to function and are going to be around for a long time and are super important to your career. So it's great to learn all the new stuff, but we're all going to be running financial systems for a long time, and we're not going to be upgrading them super fast. Right? Just the reality of your financial systems and your CRM systems and other back-end things. And for your career, depending on where you want to be, right? Depending on where you want to be is understanding both sides of that, right? The things that have to be carefully, meticulously maintained and be a couple of revs back for stability reasons, but then those things where you do need to move a little faster and take a little more risk, and really understanding how that risk factor plays into your technology decision making. That it's not all about just
the new tech.
getting to the next thing.
Yeah. It's back to your basics, right? Mm-hmm. Back to the basics. So
yeah.
It makes sense. And then, so as we look into the future, 5, 10, 15 years out, what do you see that maybe the industry looks like? Is there a significant change with this? We're talking about AI today, all the new technologies. How do you see the industry looking within 10 years, say?
I wish I had a better answer for that.
You don't have a crystal ball?
I don't have a crystal ball. I started this career when you showed up for work on Monday and you didn't have email, so you found out what you're going to work on when you got to the office, and worked on a lot of back-end systems and hung out in print operations and envisioning where we'd be in 10 or 15 years from that point. I think I would have got it all wrong. I think more in terms of what our challenges are going to be in 5 or 10 years, more so than kind of where the state of the technology in the sector will be. Like, how are we going to understand the decision-making process? How are we going to understand how the end product was produced? So knowing that production chain, how you're going to validate things, how you're going to have assurance in what you've produced, as more things are developed in the AI space, right? I know this end product, I know what we've produced, but how was it done all along the entire production chain? So I'm thinking more about those type of items and kind of specifically what it's going to look like.
Right.
Because we haven't had the first kind of big, and I'm kind of thinking purely in the generative AI space, right?
Right.
There really hasn't been that kind of first big thing where you look at it and you're like, boy, that really went south.
Right.
And why did it go south? And understanding why it went south. That will help inform how we develop some of these tools and put these tools in place. Because it's all been a lot of marketing, a lot of hype, a lot of new technology, but we learn from both. We learn from the successes, we learn from the failures. There's not a lot of failures highlighted right now. In the security space, that's how we learned what to do and not to do. Right? What worked well, what didn't work well, where things ended well or poorly. We learned from that to develop the modern security frameworks that you use today. And I think the application of technology, especially AI technology, we need to see those other things to help inform and shape where we're going to land. So I honestly don't really know
Right.
where we're going to land, which we'll hear more about.
I'm not sure anybody really. I mean, who knows the right answer?
I think we're going to develop
right
a lot
answer.
faster.
Exactly.
We're going to move a lot faster.
Well, and things, I mean, a lot of instances happen throughout our lifetime, and everybody thinks things are going to change at Y2K. Everything's going to change in this, and while things are moving faster, I think to your point, start with basics. What are the successes? What are the failures? And whatnot.
Right.
So now coming back to you, Nick, and what would be the best advice that maybe someone gave you for your career? And then also part 2 of that question would be, if you had to go back 25 years, what advice would you give yourself going into your career?
Yeah, I think the best advice I ever received was more around just don't try to become an expert on one thing and keep doing what you're really good at. Because I spent several years doing very similar type of work, and I was good at it, and it helped me progress, but it wasn't going to get me to where I wanted to be career-wise. And so some of the best advice that I was given was, hey, you're really successful, but in a fairly narrow band of technology leadership. And I realized that looking back, I can see I went from a special project to a special project to a special project.
Okay.
And what I was learning there would have served me well if my career goals were different. What I was doing was not going to get me to where I wanted to be career-wise. And so the advice I got was, hey, you need to get out of your comfort zone because you're on a successful trajectory, but not a successful trajectory to where you want to be.
Right.
Right. And that was very helpful to see it. Because when you're being successful, you don't see that you're not necessarily headed to your goal. Right. And if I went back 25 years, I don't know. Right. I was a little averse to supervising staff early in my career and passed on several opportunities to lead teams because I wanted to be that individual contributor. I think if I went back in time, advice I'd give myself was get more or be more open to leading staff, developing people, going to those trainings, right? Start supervising staff earlier in my career as opposed to avoiding it.
Right. It's interesting because I think it all comes down to sometimes people and change management. That's harder than anything, right?
Yeah.
Being able to manage and understand different human beings is probably, I would say, probably one of the more difficult things rather than learning a trait. So it's good advice that you might give yourself 25 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, the things I think about now that I'm most proud of in the last few years have to do with the accomplishments my folks I've worked with have done and seeing them achieve their goals much more than the projects that we've gotten done. Where earlier in my career, it's like, I got the project done early.
Exactly. But I guess we have to live and learn, right?
Yeah.
So excellent. Well, Nick, this has been such a pleasure having you on the Trailblazers podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for watching today's episode of the Trailblazers podcast. Until next time, take care.